Magandang araw po sa inyo. Welcome po sa isa na namang episode ng online series ni ng Pamantasan kung saan ang pagkatuto ay walang hanggan. Ito ang PNU Talks. Ako po si Edralin Pagarigan ng Baltimore County Public Schools. Ako po ay nandito ngayon para magsalita tungkol sa cultural responsive teaching in inquiry-based classrooms. So today, we're going to talk about CRT. So our objectives are 1, to describe cultural responsive teaching, or sometimes it's also called cultural response pedagogy. 2, you're going to analyze the use of language diffusion strategies in developing students' conceptual understanding in science. And then in your own, I would like you to think about evaluating how the use of language-based tasks responds to the cultural needs of diverse classrooms. So before we go ahead and get started, I would like to think about how do you describe your classrooms? Are your classrooms diverse? And what type of diversity exists in your classroom? Is your classroom diverse in terms of socioeconomic status, culture, language, or just a mix of urban and rural students? Or you may want to say, Edralin, my classroom is not diverse, and that's okay. If it's not diverse, how do you prepare the students so that they will be able to survive in a diverse and competitive workplace? So what is cultural responsive teaching? It is what I got. It's educators' ability to recognize students' cultural displays. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to go ahead and look at the definition. I'm going to pause a little bit. But I would like you to pay attention to some of the bolded words that I have prepared for you. And think about those bolded words, because I believe those are critical for you to be able to understand a cultural responsive teaching. These words such as cultural knowledge, student knows, new concepts and content, relationship, socio-emotional connection. I need you to think about those vocabulary words. And I have another set of questions for you. How much do you know your students? How does your perceptions of different subgroups in your classrooms impact your relationship with your students? Most especially your practice. How does socioeconomic status of your students impact your expectations academically and behaviorally? Or perhaps the most current situation where we are right now, how do you consider the resources available for the students in order for us to be able to offer remote learning or online learning? Because we need to step back when we see Johnny failing in your class. Is it because he doesn't have the ability to be successful? Is it because, or maybe it is because our teaching practice is driven by our lack of knowledge about him? It's very important for us to think about our positionality when we come into the classroom and think about what are our perceptions about our students. Because most of the time, the perceptions, our own perceptions about our students would drive the type of instruction and the relationship that we build within our classrooms. So what are the goals of cultural responsive teaching? We would like our students to be empowered. We would like to make our students, or we'd like to develop our students the ability to make decisions for themselves, make the decisions about their learning. We would like to have our students to be independent learners so that they're able to make a decision what information do they need in order to apply their learning. We would like our students to be critical thinkers, that they critically analyze, they critically think of the situation and the setting where they can apply their learning. And we would like them to be problem solvers because we would like to make sure that they're applying their learning. This is what cultural responsive teaching is. What do we consider in a culturally relevant pedagogy? What strategies do we employ when we are considering CRT as a teaching strategy in our classroom? So the first one is contextual learning. when we teach our content, how do we make a connection to the student's prior knowledge and cultural background? So examples would include any problems around their community that impact them, and they're able to explore the solutions where the concepts they're learning are applicable. Cultural capital. How do we include their cultural differences? How do we tap into their cultural differences so that when we teach them something and tapping on their cultural capital, then they're able to make a relationship, a connection with what they're learning and where they are coming from. So how do we integrate their cultural background? Do we provide opportunities for group work? And during these opportunities of group work, students are able to interact and learn together as they are trying to learn to each other. Now, as we know, when students are working together, our experience, as teachers, as well as the theories of cooperative learning, for example, collaborative planning or collaborative work, these are theories and these are practices which have been proven by research that it enables the students to help each other, cooperate together, and learn about each other. Now, the next one is prior knowledge. How do we leverage on their prior knowledge? So how do we use their prior knowledge, what they have learned in the past, in order to, one, determine misconceptions, if there is any, and two, build a connection between their prior knowledge and the new learning. Classroom physical setup. How do we set up our classroom? Do our instructional materials exhibit multiculturalism? Does it show cultural differences? Or maybe urban and rural settings, LGBTQ, or even minorities? Now, when the students are empowered, when the students are finding that you are tapping on their cultural differences, it builds them the confidence. It builds them the connection between them and the content, including you. And that makes learning powerful. So what does research say between the language of students from different cultural backgrounds and their science achievement? So I found it in some research that says there's a conflict between the language in the test and the student's interpretation of the language, so that the language barrier is impacting students' reading achievement, and reading achievement is correlated to science achievement. Now, how did I come up with this? We have to remember that the constructs that we create is based on our cultural background, and it's based on what we have experienced, what we are interacting with, and what is the condition that we are working on that enables us to create knowledge, or we call it the constructs. And so the research that I've been looking at is based on the US, and I have not looked at yet, the science achievement back in the Philippines in our country. But these are research that involve students whose language is not primarily English. And then I think about TIMSS, Third International Mathematics Science Survey. And one of the data that I've looked at is back in 2005, and that's when Philippines participated in this international assessment. And the result is not very pleasing. And it is okay, because what I'm thinking about is it could be because going back to this research that says there's a conflict between language in the test and the student's interpretation of the language. It could be how the test questions were worded, the context of the test questions is impacting how our students are interpreting the test questions. And so they might be choosing the wrong answers. And that could be the reason why our students have or scored lower than most of the countries in TIMSS in 2005. And that could be one of the directions of research that we can go to. Our science educators and researchers in our country, they are intelligent, And so this is something that we can look at, maybe probe into, so that we can identify what are the variables that's causing our Filipino students to not to perform very well when they are in these international assessments. So here in the US, my research is focused on identifying variables that impact the achievement of students whose primary language is not English. So I'm looking at what are the factors that are impacting the achievement in science of these minorities in public school systems. So the English learners in the US makes up about 10% of the US public school system. And there are 156 languages across, the public schools. So in one classroom, you would see that it's multicultural, where, some students are speaking in different languages. And so it's very important for us teachers to make sure that we are looking into the needs of the students so that they can be successful in our classrooms. And so my conceptual framework is focused on leveraging the cultural context of science concepts in order to, one, improve mastery and conceptual understanding, and two, improve or develop their English language proficiency. Now, Edralin, why is English language proficiency very important, and why should you do that? Now, I know that in the Philippine educational system curriculum, we are teaching our students to be English speakers. However, we have to think about that the medium of instruction in science classrooms is English. It's universal, so you cannot change that. So it's very important that you have to develop English language proficiency so that students will have conceptual understanding. So the theory that I came up with is that not putting science teaching and English teaching into silos, but they're complementing each other, so that they're learning and developing English language proficiency even if they are in the science classrooms. So I'm going to show you some examples of activities that I have been doing in my classroom so that I'm able to support these students based on their cultural and linguistic needs. So when I did a research synthesis of strategies that improve the English language proficiency and the conceptual understanding of students whose primary language is not English, I found out that there are three groups of strategies that significantly improve their achievement. And one is the literacy infused strategies, two is vocabulary development, and three is collaborative strategies. So the first thing I'm going to show you are the use of interactive notebook. Like for examples, the use of the foldables in organizing information. So the use of foldables are both kinesthetic and visuals, so that they're able to organize information on their own and assist them in understanding the concepts. The other one is the use of analogy. Remember that when you are using CRT, you are leveraging on their prior knowledge and tapping on the background knowledge so that you can make a connection between the prior knowledge and the new content. This is one way that the students are able to use writing expository, especially when they are describing observations and explaining their observations. So allowing the students to communicate their understanding in various ways or different modalities, it develops both their English language proficiency and content mastery. Now, this is another way of organizing notes. So as you can see, this is a note-taking strategy where students do take notes. In this example, we have vocabulary words in the first column and notes in the second column. But as you can see down at the bottom, they also have pictures or diagrams. Now, it's important for these students to show their understanding in different modalities. They can use words, they can use diagrams, they can use pictures. They can use in any way that they can demonstrate their understanding and then make them say it, write it, or express it in different modalities, because the more that they use language, the better they're able to develop their understanding. This is another type of note-taking. And what I like about this is that you're tapping on their own questions. They come up with their own questions. and find the information by themselves using any informational text that you offer, or they can research their own. So that's one way that you can leverage on their prior knowledge, curiosity, independence, okay? And again, that's what CRT is about. Now, this strategy is what I do before doing any experiments, annotating the lab procedures. So annotating, allowing them to annotate the lab procedures while they are reading it is making them interact with the reading, as well as make them understand the procedures before they do an experiment. Teaching vocabulary within the context of the English learners would require them to different modalities to represent their understanding of these vocabulary words. And contrary to the idea of front-loading of vocabulary words, prior to teaching them, when students are developing their contextual understanding using multisensory activities, like for example, the interactive word walls, and may include the use of the key terms in their native language, it influences the science achievement. That's when you build academic vocabulary in science, it requires the students to represent their conceptual understanding, and the cultural background and prior experience could serve as a springboard to the development of explicit contextual vocabulary. However, sometimes I use front-loading as a scaffold to maintain a student's active role in inquiry, especially when the vocabulary words are used in explaining the cross-cutting of concepts and the units. One example that I have here, which is not mine, I took that picture out of the internet, but that is the use of a Freyer model, where you have like 4 different boxes that represent a vocabulary word. Now you can vary that, you can change that if you want, you can do examples, non-examples, just like this one. You can do use in a sentence if you want. You can use a picture of, or whatever you want, so that you lead the student to the conceptual understanding of that vocabulary word. The other one on the right is an interactive dot wall. I don't own that picture. I took that out of the internet as well, and that is not in my classroom, as you can see. It's an alphabet. But interactive word wall is somewhere in your classroom where you post vocabulary words that you learn throughout the unit. And if you can keep it throughout the year, that would be perfect. Where you attach, or next to the vocabulary words would be the key words out of the definition. And that will, give the students, what are the most important words when you're looking into the definition. Or you can also leverage on the cultural context of the vocabulary words by asking them to bring something. Bring material, bring things that are related to the vocabulary word that you are looking into, and you can glue it next to the vocabulary word so that they can reference back to it whenever you're having a discussion. Or, when they feel the need of going back to the vocabulary word to make them remember it, to increase their to increase their way of remembering the vocabulary word. They can reference back to it when they look at your interactive word wall. Now, the other group of strategies, cooperative learning and collaborative learning, are research-based pedagogy, which have been proven to be effective in increasing achievement across any group of students. So here, this is an example of a group activity where my students came up with a argumentation using CER, claim, evidence, and reasoning as a scaffolding. So this is one way that a scaffolded argumentation activity with my students, where we did experiment, they came up with their claim based on the results of the experiment, they give me an evidence to support their claim, and they give me a reasoning by explaining the connection between the claim and the evidence. So they did this as a group, as a beginning activity when we were doing argumentation, as I was teaching them how to do argumentation in science classroom. This is an example of another collaborative activity, which is the use of a gallery walk. Now, in a gallery walk, in this picture, my students, in this picture in particular, my students are moving around the classroom. They're looking into other groups' output, and they are providing peer feedback. They criticize constructively in order to improve the work of other groups. So that in that way, they are looking into what are the expectations based on the rubric, and they're working as a group so that they have a better understanding of the expectations, and at the same time, they have better understanding of the concepts involved in that activity. So that is about my presentation on cultural responsive teaching. So I hope you learned something out of it. And thank you for inviting me, and thank you for allowing me to share my practice. I-comment ang inyong katanungan at mga kuro-kuro tungkol sa ating episode ngayong araw. Huwag kalimutang i-like at i-share ang episode natin sa muli. Ako po si Edralin at sa inyo ang PNU Talk.